I'm Sam Roberts of the New York Times, and welcome to the New York Times Close Up. We'll hear an update on the COVID pandemic in a moment, but first, a wave of migrants into New York City has created a new kind of housing crisis. Earlier this week, Mayor Adams suggested an idea that was also floated in 2002 under Mayor Michael Bloomberg to temporarily house new migrants on cruise ships. The proposal was derided by advocates for the homeless, but the city has taken in more than 11,000 people from the country's southern border since May. The stress on the city shelter system increases each day as the mayor continues to trade barbs with Texas Governor Greg Abbott and Florida Governor Ron DeSantis, both of whom have sent throngs of migrants from their states to New York. Following this closely is New York Times Metro reporter Andy Newman. Andy is back with us to bring us up to date on this story. Andy, what makes this crisis different from all the other homeless crises we've been experiencing really for decades now?
Well, Sam, the number, it's basically the number of people and the rate at which people are coming in now. The city said that this past week it's been getting some days 300 or 400 people per day coming in on the buses from Texas. And 300 or 400 people is enough to fill an entire homeless shelter. So if you think about the city having to open a new shelter every single day, it puts an enormous amount of pressure on the city, because opening a shelter is not like flipping a switch. You have to find a landlord. The city has hundreds of shelters. There are over 300, and almost all of them are privately owned. They're run mostly by private nonprofits. And so the city has to forge a whole set of relationships to open a shelter, and it's just very, very difficult.
Andy, how and why are these people coming here?
The largest group coming to New York is people from Venezuela. For years, people have been fleeing Venezuela because it's in a state of complete chaos and economic crisis. I think something like 7 million people have left Venezuela in the last decade or so. So right now, the city has a ton of people coming in from Venezuela, also a lot of people coming from Colombia, from other Central American countries, coming from Haiti, coming from Africa. But the biggest group is Venezuelans, and they pose a particular challenge in New York, because normally when people migrate to the city, they go to a place where they have friends or family who are already set up. That makes it much easier for them to assimilate, to find housing, to find work. There really has been no significant Venezuelan community in New York. Now there is, but it's just, it consists mostly of people who are in shelter at this point.
Are they coming here voluntarily on their own, or are they being shipped here?
That is a very good question. Governor Abbott of Texas has been sending buses up here. How people get on the buses, what people are being told when they get on the buses, how they kind of lure people to get on the buses is very much in dispute.
No, they're being what? They're being lured? They're being conned? Or
there have been stories about how people are being sort of conned. Some people are told, like, they'll say, oh, you want to go to North Carolina where your uncle lives? Here, to get on this bus. Mm-hmm. It's going to North Carolina, but it's not. It's coming to New York. But there are plenty of people who are being told, you're going to go to New York. It's a place, it's the only city in the country where they have to give you shelter. There is work here. And so a lot of people are getting on the buses voluntarily also.
Now, President Trump, when he was in office, called New York a sanctuary city, that we would be kind to immigrants. Why are we taking all these people in other than pure compassion? Do we have to? Do we have a legal obligation? And can't we, this is, a perhaps cynical question, but I ask from a legal standpoint, can't we just send them back to Florida, Texas, or anywhere else?
I don't know the exact answer to the legal question, but New York is the only city in the country that has what's called a right to shelter. Anybody in this city if you need a bed and you ask for a bed, they have to give you one. The city has to offer you one the same day. And no other place in the country does that year-round for everyone. In New York, the right to shelter is something that exists because of a series of lawsuits in the 70s and 80s. To undo it would require the city going back to court and saying, we need to be relieved of these obligations for whatever emergency reason. The Legal Aid Society, which is who initially filed the suits that got the right to shelter, would fight those, would fight the city very hard and say, no, you must do this. Mayor Adams was asked the other day about whether it's possible to just send people back, and his response was, we're not going to do that because it's not the right thing to do. We're a sanctuary city. We welcome immigrants. We are not Texas. He's trying to draw the biggest distinction he can between New York's policies and those of Governor Abbott. So it's a political fight as well as a social fight.
Mayor Koch, toward the end of his administration, probably built and rehabilitated more housing than anyone else, certainly up to that point. But he also said, if you build it, they will come. The more housing, the more affordable housing you create, the more people will come and fill it. So how does this phenomenon perpetuate itself? Is there any point at which we just become filled up, that we can't build any more housing, or we run out of space, in effect? It
seems like there are always more buildings in New York, and the question of whether the city will literally run out of room for homeless shelters and places to house people, it's very much an open question. We may find out in the months to come if people keep coming at this rate of like 1,000, 2,000 people per week. It's a lot.
What about running out of money?
It's very expensive. Right now, the city is under a budget crunch. Mayor Adams recently told every city agency to cut their spending by 3% this year. And the city will not say exactly how much it's costing to house all these migrants in shelter, but given that the daily cost per person of sheltering someone is between $150 and $200 a day, and right now there are about 10,000 migrants in shelters. If that kept up for a whole year, you're talking hundreds of millions of dollars.
We have seen the number of homeless people, depending, of course, on how you define homeless, increase over the years. What is the number now, as best we can guess it, in New York City?
The number in the city's main shelter system, which is run by the Department of Homeless Services, is about 57,000. There are another 10,000 or so people in other shelters. There are also thousands of people in the streets and the subways. That number is usually given as 3,000 roughly. So altogether, you're talking about a little over 70,000 people who are homeless in New York right now.
Has that number been fairly constant over recent years, or is it climbing?
It's gone up and down. The latter part of Mayor de Blasio's tenure, the shelter population dropped. Once the pandemic hit, the population of people in family shelters with children dropped very, very sharply, mostly because there was an eviction moratorium. And when Mayor Adams took office, in fact, the overall shelter population was as low as it's been in almost a decade. Just since May, there's been an increase of 10 or 11,000 people in the shelter population. And if this keeps up for another month or so, we're going to be back at record high territory.
Andy, is this something the city is prepared for, has been prepared for, should have been prepared for?
It's a very good question. Any administration that comes in, a new administration like the Adams administration, they always seem to struggle with homelessness at the beginning because it's such an incredibly complicated subject and it's so hard to get it right. The Coalition for the Homeless and the Legal Aid Society, which are groups that are kind of monitoring the city's response to homelessness, they say that back in the spring, the shelter situation, the vacancy rate in the family shelters was already dropping before the migrants came. And they say that they tried to kind of push the city to become better prepared just for any increase in the shelter population. And the city seems to have been caught kind of flat-footed by this. At the same time, as Mayor Adams says, it's unprecedented. It's not unprecedented in terms of the number of people in shelter, but in terms of the number of people coming in every day, every week. The city has not had to deal with this before.
Is there some panacea out there? If it's not cruise ships, is it vacant office space? Is there something out there that is going to solve this problem, at least temporarily?
I have not heard of any panacea.
And with winter coming, is the problem going to get worse, presumably?
That's a good question. The population in adult shelters tends to go up in the winter for obvious reasons. No one wants to, or fewer people want to sleep in the street in January. I don't know what's going to happen.
Well,
and I don't think anyone does.
No, but it looks like every reason points to things probably getting worse than they are now. Thanks to New York Times Metro reporter Andy Newman. And coming up next, a pandemic that might have ended, depending on whom you ask. The COVID pandemic lingers, and the New York Times homepage continues with its pandemic dashboard. But what to make of President Biden's comment on 60 Minutes that the pandemic is over?
The pandemic is over. We still have a problem with COVID. We're still doing a lot of work on it. But the pandemic is over.
Just a quick look at the statistics shows that people are still contracting the virus, and deaths, unfortunately, continue. New York Times health reporter Sheryl Gay Stolberg has been covering the pandemic since the very beginning. She joins us now from Washington to discuss the latest. Welcome, Sheryl. Tell me now, what should I do with my vast collection of masks? Should I keep them till Halloween or just ditch them?
I think you should keep them, Sam. I really do. And I think you should wear them in crowded indoor spaces, especially in the fall, when we're likely to see a surge. And, you may find yourself around people who are vulnerable, who would like you to wear a mask. So don't ditch the masks.
Who is still vulnerable as far as we can best tell?
Well, older people are still vulnerable, and people with underlying medical conditions, cancer patients, people with suppressed immune systems, or people maybe who are vulnerable to, say, bronchitis or other respiratory or lung ailments. All those people are still vulnerable, just like they would be vulnerable to other respiratory illnesses like the flu or pneumonia, or even a really bad cold that could turn into pneumonia.
Sheryl, barely a day after the president said the pandemic is pretty much over, the Times had a story saying that the Omicron variant is not going away, and it perhaps is likely to mutate into all sorts of other variants that may be difficult to suppress, may be resistant to various new vaccines and boosters. So which is it? How worried should we actually be?
Well, that's hard to know. Nobody has a crystal ball, right? We didn't know that the coronavirus was coming in January of 2020, yet there was always that possibility. Scientists have been saying for years that, we could have another pandemic. A lot of people thought we were going to have another flu pandemic, like the one in 1918. So you can't really predict what's going to happen with a virus. The hope is that if Omicron sticks around, as it almost certainly will, that it will just mutate in a way that is insignificant and doesn't cause very severe disease. But, like with anything, we don't know what's going to happen next. And so if the pandemic has taught us anything, it's that we need to be prepared for what might happen. And I guess hope for the best and prepare for the worst.
I'm a little bit of a numbers wonk, so I look at those charts in the Times online all the time, and I see cases are going down percentage-wise, hospitalizations are going down. The deaths keep moving up and down a little bit. What is the metric that determines when the pandemic is actually over?
Well, there really is no formal process for declaring the pandemic over. The World Health Organization declared the pandemic in 2020, and it will have responsibility for declaring it over if that is to come. Its Director General, Dr. Tedros, said last week that we seem to be nearing the end. We're not quite there yet. I think that what a lot of people in the United States have said is they would like to see the number of COVID deaths kind of approximate flu deaths in a difficult flu year. And we're still way above that. We still have 400 to 500 Americans dying every day, either of the coronavirus, or some might say with the coronavirus, because some are, already vulnerable to other diseases. But that's a lot of people. I think hospitalizations are a good metric. Deaths are a lagging indicator. They always lag behind hospitalizations. And cases, frankly, are not the best metric anymore because so many people are testing at home, and so those numbers aren't reported. But we know that there's still roughly 30,000 Americans hospitalized every day with COVID-19, and that also is still a pretty high number.
And do we have any better sense of the long-term effects of COVID? People who have had it, people who recover from it, but may still be showing some of the symptoms, or symptoms that may show themselves even later.
So there are a lot of, there's a lot of complicated symptoms that flow from a COVID-19 infection, or that can flow. And people who have long COVID report everything from continued kind of brain fog, they just feel fuzzy, or they feel really tired all the time. Some people say it has triggered in them a chronic fatigue syndrome. I talked to someone recently who said she still has what they call COVID toes. COVID toes are like when your toes turn kind of purpley blue. And, research is ongoing to figure out what the long-term effects are going to be. But I think it's safe to say that, a significant proportion of people who were infected with COVID-19 will have long-term effects. And that will create different burdens on the healthcare system, on the workplace. There are some people who haven't been able to go back to work, and it'll create new demands for scientific research to come up with therapies that can address some of these ongoing effects.
So you have seen this up close from a medical standpoint, from a professional standpoint too. What do you think the new normal is as a result of COVID?
I think we may be living the new normal right now, which is that COVID is going to be with us. Initially, when the pandemic hit, we thought, okay, we're going to wipe this out. We'll get a vaccine, everybody will get vaccinated, and it'll be nice and tidy, and bye-bye virus. But I think everyone has come to the conclusion that that is just not going to happen, that this virus will be with us for a long time, that the best we can hope for is that it'll be kind of cyclical, that, it'll come and go with the seasons. Hopefully, it will get to a place where we have more treatments. Right now we have Paxlovid that isn't a perfect treatment, but it has been shown to reduce hospitalizations and deaths. And, we'll have a vaccine, hopefully, that will be more protective. As you know, the FDA just authorized the new bivalent vaccine, which is directed against newer variants. And, at a certain point, we'll just go on and be in a kind of equipoise with the virus. But still, vulnerable people are going to be at risk. And I worry about those people. I worry about the elderly. I worry that as a society, we're just ready to say, okay, COVID is over and we can just go on our merry way, when we do all need to be thoughtful about protecting people who are at risk. And that's why I said at the outset, save your mask, because maybe you're going to be in a situation where you don't need it to protect yourself, but you need it to protect someone else.
We've been reading all along the way that it likely gets worse in colder weather. Is that still true?
Well, we're going to find out. yes and no. I mean, we saw the Delta surge happened in the summer, if you remember.
Hmm.
Respiratory ailments typically get worse in colder weather, not necessarily because of the weather, but because people move indoors, and the indoor climate is a better breeding ground for those kind of viruses and for the transmission of those kinds of ailments. So it's not that suddenly the virus gets worse when the weather turns cold. It's just that more people go indoors, and frankly, in the South, we see that in the reverse. And in places like Florida in the summer is where people are moving indoors. It's a greater risk.
Hmm. Well, that's interesting. I didn't know that. That's sort of the old wives' tale about not getting your feet wet or whatever.
Right. Don't go out with a wet head in the
Exactly.
winter. You'll
Tell
catch a
us
cold.
as much as you can. What do you personally, your family do to keep continuing to protect yourself against getting COVID?
Um,
I
well, we
remember
do
I
the things
started
that
off bleaching everything that came into my house. I ruined more clothes doing that. But
yeah.
what do you do now?
So, well, we did start off in the early days. We were wiping down the groceries. I mean, I think we just take precautions. Like I said before, we wear masks in crowded indoor spaces, certainly on an airplane or on a train or on a bus. My family and I had COVID. We all had it in December when a lot of people were getting COVID. If you look at the lines on the New York Times tracker, they go like this, whoop, and then all the way down again. So we frankly have no idea how we got it, but we all got sick. One of us had no symptoms, and the rest of us had, thankfully, fairly mild symptoms because we were vaccinated. And that's another thing that people can and should do, which is get the vaccine. We know that the vaccine prevents severe illness and death. And it is maybe not a perfect vaccine. It might not keep you from getting COVID, but if you do get it, the symptoms will be much less severe. And so I honestly think that is the number one thing that people can do, which is go out and get this bivalent vaccine if it's appropriate for you. For some people, it won't be. Somebody who had COVID like just last week isn't going to get the vaccine right now. But for the vast majority of us, that is a good place to start. And then masking and just doing the basic things that prevent illness, like wash your hands,
Hmm.
you know, just practice basic, sort of common sense.
A quick
And
last question.
if you're sick, stay home from work. Don't bring everybody else your germs.
Good advice. Quick last question. Are we better prepared for a pandemic now than we were before?
Ooh, I think that's a really hard question, honestly. A lot of people sadly would say no, that we're really not better prepared. I'm not sure if that's true. We're certainly more aware. We know what we did wrong the last time, but the Biden administration has been asking Congress for money to better prepare for a fall surge. Congress hasn't been willing to give any more money for a pandemic response or prevention. So, and frankly, we're a lot more divided than we were as a country, and that is not really a good recipe for pandemic preparedness because trust in public health has been eroded, and that is a really sad and unfortunate fallout from this pandemic.
Sheryl Gay Stolberg of the New York Times, thank you so much for joining us. Coming up
Thank you,
next,
Sam.
my thoughts on New York Senate race. Chuck Schumer is a shoo-in for re-election in November. He's so confident that he even gave away some of his campaign war chest to other candidates. But here are two reasons the race matters anyway. One, the Democratic margin in the Senate is razor thin. 48 Democrats and 2 independents in the Democratic caucus now face a fairly impervious red wall of 50 Republicans. 35 of the 100 senators are up for re-election. Polls rate only 4 of those seats as toss-ups, seats that either party could win. As we learn every November, elections are not predictable. Inflation, gas prices, the recurring pandemic, a wider war in Ukraine, federal indictments, some other October surprise, any of those can change the odds overnight. If the Democrats lose control of the Senate, Chuck Schumer will lose the majority leadership that he's held since January 2021. In the Senate, seniority is the usual route to a leadership job. Of the 25 longest-serving senators in history, none was a New Yorker. Schumer is the first from New York to serve as majority leader. He's the first Jewish leader of either chamber of Congress. In 2016, he became the first New Yorker to lead the Democratic caucus in the Senate. But even if he's demoted to minority leader, he's poised to break a New York record for longevity in November. If he wins a fifth term, he will surpass Daniel Patrick Moynihan, another Democrat, and Jacob Javits, the state's last liberal Republican, as New York's longest-serving United States Senator. For the New York Times and CUNY TV, I'm Sam Roberts.